Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Once again, I am being somewhat quiet, somewhat muted, not as effusive as I normally would. Naomi is in the other room taping a podcast again. I do not want to end up in the background. I guess listen to her episode of Stradio Lab, and you can hear if I was successful or not. So I'll keep this brief. Today's episode is great. It's Karl Blau. I've been a fan of Karl's music for a long time, but if you do not know who Karl is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Samish Island, Washington, musician Karl Blau grew up in a family of amateur musicians and at first thought he was going to be a fine artist. But by the end of high school, Karl was all in on music, and his band, Captain Fathom, began playing in Anacortes. It was there he met Beat Happening's Brett Lunsford and a pre-microphone/mount eerie Phil Elverum, and they formed the band D+. Being part of the Anacortes music scene eventually led Karl to joining Laura Veer's band, to working at K Records' Dub Narcotic Studios, and to write and record dozens of albums since the late 90s of his own, which were all released on labels like Lunsford's Know Your Own, K Records, Bella Union, and through Karl's own recording series, Kelp. Anyway, this was good. I don't think Karl expected the kind of conversation we were going to have, but he was very game and very open. We talk about everything from his father's mental health issues and how that kind of impacted him when he was growing up, and the early days of the Anacortes music scene, which I've, as someone who is a fan of music from there, from the musicians that hail from there, and from, you know, in general, like the K Records scene or the scene from Olympia, Washington, you know, Kill Rock Stars, all that kind of stuff, I thought was really cool, and I hope you enjoy it. It was cool for me because I've been listening to Karl's music for like decades now, since I discovered D+, back at WPTS 92.1 FM, the radio station at Pitt that I was a part of when I was in college. And through D+, then I just discovered Karl's solo recordings. All right, before we get into the episode, just a little bit of housekeeping stuff. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Twitter for dumb jokes. Instagram if you want to see pictures of Naomi and the pets, mostly. You should subscribe to the show. I've got a lot of great episodes coming up, including the aforementioned Laura Veer's. That was really cool. Dear Nora, very wonderful talk. Katie's music is brilliant. And I just talked to one of my favorite comics writers, Kieran Gillen, who is currently writing the big X-Men Eternals Avengers crossover, and is just everything he does is just great. So stay tuned for those episodes. But for now, let's talk to Karl. Fit in because like you are in Philly, which makes like Philly was one of the angriest cities I've ever lived in. I lived there for like 4 or 5 years, and it was everything was. I mean, it's a city where like they threw D batteries at Santa Claus at a Eagles game or something like that, right? Like, right. Like it's full of fury, and you seem like very chill. So I'm kind of curious how you are dealing with that, with being in a city of ambient anger.
Totally. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, there's a lot of, a lot of trauma and just rampant, just disregard for like safety and stuff. It's crazy. Like driving over there makes me crazy. Just, I hate it. Every time I have to get in the car, I'm like, okay, brace yourself. This could be, I don't know. This is just, and I just see crazy stuff every time I'm out on the road. But I mean, then the people are just really like, you might get punched in the arm at first, and then they're just your best friend or whatever. It's just, no, I haven't had a whole lot of I mean, the people I've met have just been precious for sure. And yeah, it's a trip for sure. It's the absolute like antithesis of Anacortes.
But you are a person that either, you tell me, either does not absorb this stuff. You're kind of like Teflon, and like the ambient whatever kind of bounces off you, and you're your own kind of person in your own kind of like ecosystem. Or are you just healthy enough that you can absorb it and process it in a healthy way and then just go about your life?
I mean, I think it makes me step up to being a healthier person because it's challenging me at every turn. So yeah, I have to be constantly keeping that in check, my mental health in check, for sure. Whereas maybe over here I could just let it go unchecked a little further, and I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm doing okay. My wife seems to be really just really enjoying it, and especially inspired by it stuff too. So she's constantly kind of keeping me in check too of the bright sides. But yeah, I'm in a sense I feel like I'm at my edge of living in a city, but I don't know. I've been coming back to Anacortes the last couple of years in the summers and getting my fix here, so that's been really nice. It kind of carries me through.
I mean, are you generally an adaptable person? Like, if you got dropped into any kind of scenario, are you just kind of like, yeah, this is cool, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I've been touring major cities since the mid '90s, so I have a lot of experience with cities and navigating them, and it just physically and mentally. And so yeah, I think maybe I was kind of more mutable anyway, but now I feel like I have the tools and skills to really be ready for whatever. But yeah, I definitely crave the Northwest for the relaxed state here, and yeah, I feel like I'm still kind of definitely keeping aligned with it here, and yeah, I love it. It's hard to be away, but.
No. But when you were younger, do you think you were this adaptable, or do you know what it is? I think of like, maybe it's just that this coast is more comfortable with change because it was the last part to be colonized, right? To kind of be exploited. And so the people coming out here were more comfortable with like change, and they created a culture or an atmosphere that's more comfortable with change. Like when you grew up, were you okay with change?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think everyone basically who's out here has had a lot of change. Yeah, in that way, their families have gone through a lot of change just very recently, gone through changes and stuff. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like people who have made it out to the West Coast, it's only kind of recently that's happened with them or their families, and so yeah, I could see that. I mean, unfortunately, we've reached the edge there. We can't go any further out.
Hey, there's still space.
There's space. Yeah, Alaska.
The billionaires can get there. But I'm kind of curious though. Like, were there any changes in your life when you were growing up, or do you think it was just pretty like placid the entire time?
Yeah, it was really. I grew up kind of on a rock of, in a sense of really stable family. My three brothers, all 3 years apart, we just kind of looked to each other for like guidance and stuff. And I think we have a really insular experience of stability. That was all kind of rocked. The foundation was rocked when I was I must have been about 11 or 12, when my dad started exhibiting signs of mental instability, and he would spend the next 10 years or so in and out of hospital and stuff. So that created a big shift in security, and then but I mean, like that probably set me up to kind of be open for things just going south and just trying to figure it out. And yeah,
that's really rough. Was it something genetic?
It's a hard time. Was bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. I think, it's hard to say. I mean, anymore, I think it's gut health. I mean, what my wife's really into this research, and I've been kind of following along with her. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of mental illness comes down to our terrible cultural diets and environments. So, because it's just what they found out is like guts and brain are all connected, and and what and your gut health is all connected to your mental health. And he just had a terrible diet, and I think, and then and I don't know, who's to say? I can't tell now. He died of cancer from like skin cancer, which he was just around a lot of environmental toxins. Like he worked on the oyster plant, but in the shop around chemicals all the time. Just he'd always come home with like stuff on his hands and stuff. Just always just absorbing chemicals through his skin. So yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, but I think it's probably a gut health thing in a way, or some of it is at least.
I just asked because I was wondering if it was something you and your brothers have had to contend with, or had to struggle with, or had thought about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of my brothers is possibly continuing with that, but it's and I think gut health is something that is kind of passed down too through the culture of what you're eating, and also you get your gut health from your mom when you're born. Out of the birth canal, you come out with that flora in your gut, or you don't, or you're born cesarean birth, and then you don't have that. So I mean, we're like generations after generation of being cut off from what our ancestors would have given us for gut health. And
because I think it's interesting, not in a good way, but like, you had this like huge rupture when did you say you were 10 years old when your dad started to?
Yeah, 10 or 11, yeah, something like that.
Do you remember like what the first incident was, or like what was the like?
Oh yeah, very clearly. I was in my bedroom working on this Lego helicopter. I was so excited because I like, if you turn this gear, it made the helicopter blade spin, and I was so psyched. I brought it out like this big, huge thing, and my mom was just in tears, and my dad was speaking incoherently, and I was just like, "What the heck's going on?" It was like a real crash of just an emotional experience for me, and I can remember that very vividly that day.
Were you an emotional kid?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't very good at expressing my emotions, but yeah, definitely an emotional kid. Yeah. Real sensitive.
Yeah. No, I get that. I was the same, but I didn't have the vocabulary or the tools to like understand how to deal with any of that stuff. I was just sensitive. So like everything set me off. Like I was in tears, not a lot, but like definitely things that like other kids wouldn't have cried over. Cried
exactly.
Over.
Yeah. And because of that, you were probably bullied and all this stuff. Yeah, I was too. Yeah, I was terrible. That just our cultures doesn't really allow that. We unfortunately we didn't grow up in Sweden.
Yeah, but I also like I had friends that were fighters, so like I bounced back and forth between like over emotional, and then if someone were to like bully me, I would like fight back, or definitely there was a lot of smart mouthing which also got me in trouble when I was younger. So like it was a weird. I grew up in a weird dynamic between being overly sensitive and then I guess the like fighting back or being or smart mouth and was also being overly sensitive because the attack would be like that. Like there wasn't like a hesitation. It was just like someone would do something to me. Like I was drawing in my notebook in 6th grade science class and the guy behind me stabbed his pencil through one of the drawings in my notebook. And I got so angry, I just picked up a textbook and hit him with it, which was not good. Right. And I got in trouble, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, actually he got into more trouble because I was a good student. He was not. And so, but there was a lot of just like emotions first when I was a kid. It seems like the same for you. I mean, at what point did you start to either master this or I don't know what, at what point was there a point where you started to like kind of like rein in the emotions either like consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say still kind of a work in progress, but, yeah, I mean, I think, Callie and I have been together since 95 or 96. And, I think it was pretty much with her that I started to realize how important that would be to get a grasp of my emotions.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Yeah. And she's been an amazing guide for me a teacher for me in that regard, for sure. Making me see, like, I reflect on my emotionally reactive tendencies.
Yeah. The other thing I think about it, am I pronouncing Anacortes right?
Mm-hmm.
And you grew up on Samish Island, is that true?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, I think of that place, like, I looked up online last night, and like about the time probably you were growing up there, it was like a very like small population. It was like 10,000 people, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a very like natural, like especially like all the other musicians, including yourself, that came out of there. Like it feels like there's a lot of nature in your music, and I'm wondering what that was like growing up in such a small place and such a place that is like very surrounded by nature.
Yeah, it was all about being out in it and just the dream world that is the natural surroundings. I mean, here it's like you can step into that world so easily, just kind of follow any road or ends up in a beach or a forest. So, well, easy. And on Samish Island, it was mostly wooded back then, and now it looks like a golf course or something. It's kind of crazy. But when we were there, it was just a bunch of like hippie punks kind of living out there. Everyone kind of just getting by. They moved out there because they could afford that place, and so it was just a bunch of really people who just scraping by basically. So it just had this really wacky, kind of exciting and kind of sometimes scary vibe. But I was fortunate to be born in a real bumper crop of boys that were all born on the island at the same time. There were like 9 of us, all born weirdly. I mean, we're talking like a population of like 450. There's just no reason that should have happened. I don't know what was happening, but just so there was this like Lord of the Flies kind of group of boys that would just go out and play army and all sorts of outdoor. It was just always, life was just outside and playing in the woods, and so it was just idyllic in a way, just idyllic. And I don't even know where you can get that. I mean, it was just an incredible experience. And I mean, and my brothers too, they had friends on the island, but there was just this whole gang of boys my age, no girls, strange. But So yeah, and then eventually when I did find Anacortes, it was in high school. I mean, I'd known it was an interesting town and a cool place, but there's a lot of great little villages and towns out here. I didn't understand the music side of it until I was in high school and had my license and was taking lessons in Mount Vernon from this guitar teacher, Tom Gustafson, and he had another student, Jake Navarro, that was asking him if he knew any, or maybe it was Brian Tottenham, any one of those guys, or both of those guys were taken from Tom. Anyway, they asked if he knew of any other like potential bass players, and I'd been playing bass in jazz band at school. Tom, the guitar teacher, knew that, so these guys called me up, these Anacortes guys, and we started this band then, Captain Fathom, with Nick Meyer, and suddenly between that and there's this really cool record store called The Business in town that I realized was just such a cool place. That I just suddenly I was like in Anacortes every day in high school. And
how far is it away from Sandwich Island?
It's like a half hour or 25 minutes, half hour. It would probably be just as fast by boat, just across the water, but you have to like drive all the way around the Bayview, Padilla Bay, and so yeah, it was Burlington where I was kind of like going to school. But that didn't really have any. It didn't have any music scene, or just had a really good football scene, and all the jocks were really happy in Burlington, but terrible for the arts, just the worst.
When you said Sandwich Island, you said scary at some times. What did you mean by that?
Well, there was a lot of like kind of 20, 30 somethings that you just kind of had to watch out for. Like they drove Camaros, and I don't know, just kind of a scary life.
Wait, sorry. Can you? What do you mean, like 20 or 30 somethings that drove Camaros? Like what?
Those guys that like living out there just cheaply with everyone else, but they're like, I don't know, they're just sketchy suckers.
Like creeps or criminals? Like what is
creeps and criminals? Yeah, probably. I don't know. I only knew a few of them, but then there's some of them there was just lore about. But, and I can't say there was like a ton of these guys, but there was just this kind of creepy side to being out there that I think everyone on Sandwich Island got a taste of at some point.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a taste of it?
Oh, yeah. Well, one time, my friend Robert and I were like, I don't know why I thought this was a good idea. It was snowing in the middle of the winter, and we were like, hitting cars with snowballs as they went by, like total idiots. Just like, this seems like it'd be fun, just trying to do anything, just come up with something to try. And yeah, this guy, he had a crappy, like beat up, I think it was a Camaro type vehicle. Anyway, yeah, and he's going slow, and we're not throwing ice balls or anything. We just, pegged the side of his car, and then, of course, he stopped, came back, and I can't remember which guy it was. I don't want to say any names anyway, and this wasn't so creepy, but it scared the crap out of us. We were both I think one of us, Robert teared off in the woods, and I was just like sitting there petrified. And he came back and just rolled down his window, was like, "You're lucky I don't own a Porsche," That wasn't really exactly a creepy. Scared the pants off me. Yeah, I mean, half part of my family is some jock type dudes that are would always just I don't know. There's a lot of drinking and driving and just stuff you'd kind of think. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a lot of verbiage to back up the creepiness, but it was felt. I mean, I had a bunch of my friends who grew up there just got really screwed up along the way too. I think just being in the valley and just like, I think it can be really depressing if you don't figure out what you're going to do, and there's not a lot of options, and it's just getting more and more expensive. A lot of them are. There's a real other side to the idyllic nature of the place and the beauty.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other side of humans struggling to just be, to exist. And that usually involved a lot of alcohol and drug use.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something about the suburbs. This is not the suburbs, but like for me, it's analogical to the suburbs where it's a great place to grow up. Mm-hmm. Like I loved growing up in the suburbs in Pennsylvania. There was so much nature around, like you could run around in the forest. Or I lived in a neighborhood for the first 14 years of my life where like there was a tight knit group of people. It sounds like the 9 boys that you ran with, where like we were always playing, like going to play basketball and football and baseball and just like run around outside together. And then there's this point you hit where you realize how limiting the suburbs are. And it's probably around like your teenage years. And you have to kind of decide whether you are really bothered enough to leave, or whether you kind of like the idyllicness of this kind of cloistered area enough. And then you got to fight against how that sours. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about, where like it at some point, like if you just kind of like, it becomes so cloistered. It's like kind of like the last couple years. If you've been taking the pandemic seriously, like you're stuck inside a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And so it can kind of drive you a little nuts. That seems like the same thing. I don't know if I'm just talking out my ass or not.
Yeah, there's not much to do. I mean, I think for a man in his 20s or a person in 20s, they're, one of the options is just going to the tavern, and that's like one of the only options. It's just, I just don't think we've figured it out as a culture exactly what we're doing with ourselves. And just with all the modern tools, everything's just kind of spinning out in this way where we feel like we need to drive everywhere, and we just don't have it figured out, like how we make this a positive experience, and how we come together as a community to help one another out or something. It's kind of everyone for themselves, and it gets real lonely and freaky. And I think a lot of people just end up on the spiral because that's just one of the options.
Yeah. It's alienating. It really it could, because you're so far away from other people, your house becomes this kind of fortress. And you start being alienated from, and unless there's like some community stuff where you go to church or temple, or there's a mosque or whatever it is, right? There might be some kind of community center, but it seems like music kind of like saved you from falling into that.
Yeah, I was never really in danger of falling into that, just based on, I think the alcohol is one of the major lubricants in that process. And it just never has agreed with me, luckily. So I just, but yeah, I mean, it's been impossible for me to, not impossible. It's been really hard for me to figure out how to stay here. Like you're saying, like it's really hard to figure out how to stay. The housing market's off the chain, and
yeah.
It's really hard it's really hard to afford living here. Part of the reason why we went to Philadelphia is because it was a little bit cheaper and a lot more resources probably available. But yeah, it's just a beautiful place to go to visit and go to. And then there's just a lot of people with money moving here now. And so I don't know, it's changing so much. Now there's less and less, I think, for like the young people to do, and just because there's less and less forest. But yeah, so we're in a little bit of an identity crisis, I think, over here. Just how do we make it possible for people to grow up here and stay here? Which I think is the goal for any community, is to like provide a place for the community members to grow up and thrive in, or that ought to be a goal.
But when you were younger, did you have that kind of searching feeling? Did you feel like you were part of the community? Did you feel like, I like it, but I don't want to be here? Like, what led you to kind of like, I'm going to be in a band, I'm going to tour? Like, what was the original feeling at the bottom?
Well, growing up, I didn't think touring was really a possibility. I mean, I thought that was just for certain people who had this charisma and this. I didn't think being such a small-minded, small town person. I just didn't think that was a possibility, and it was. And then there's a band from Anacortes called Gravel that went to Sweden, and then there's this guy who owned the record store, with a business, Brett Lunsford, who had been to Japan and all just all over with his band Beat Happening, and it just because those people had taken the plunge and gone for it, it gave me some hope. And then suddenly, my friend Phil is out on the road touring, and he's like a couple years younger than me. It's like, oh, that guy can do it. Like, but just seeing people all around me taking the leap, I was like, well, maybe. And I was actually invited into D Plus, the band with Brett and Phil,
right?
And then we started touring, and that was how. I don't know if I hadn't been in that band, if I would have ever thought that I could have done that myself, because it was that gift of being shown how, the simple steps of what it takes to go out there and tour firsthand, that really allowed me to make that conscious change of like, I can do this. I can set up shows. I can go on tour. And of course they were just a train wreck, many train wrecks in a row, the tour for the first time doing solo. I was barely getting through, and it was kind of scary but really exciting, and proving to myself by doing it, even if it wasn't perfect, it was set me up to go forward further. And but now so that I feel like in Anacortes, that model is really set out there for kids growing up here. Like, that's one of my options. I can become a touring artist. There's this person, these bands all have gone on tour, and it's not some mysterious thing that only set out for certain types of people. It's like, I think in this community, there's a culture where this is one of your options. And really, yeah.
No, I was just curious, like, when you said those first tours, you were like barely scraping by, like, what was going on? You just like were just figuring out as you were on the road?
I mean, this is back before cell phones, before Google Maps.
Right.
This is
I remember
like
I toured
tape in the mail.
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
In the early 2000s with an atlas, and we were just like, all right, we're going from New York to Boston. Let's look at the atlas and go see which route we're taking. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It was all about maps. And that was super exciting. But yeah, it was. So many places that I just was like, I heard about people playing there, so I sent my tape and followed up with a phone call, and real classy. Yeah, and I mean, CDs were just kind of coming out around this time, so that kind of made it a little easier to send. And
did you have any ambition outside of music? Did you just think you would end up in like the family oyster business or something?
No, and none of my brothers did either. We never considered that really. Although I did end up working there for a bit. Few years. I was, as a kid, I was just thinking I was going to be a visual artist, because I just spent every waking hour basically, I'd skip recesses and just draw. And I was just like, oh, for sure I'm going to be I just said that to myself over and over every day. Like, I'm an artist. I'm going to be an artist. And then had a pretty crummy art teacher in high school. And at the same time, I had been studying classical guitar since like 6th grade. And my family, I'm sure you've read about this, but my family's all really into music. My parents met in high school band, and they all made sure we had to take some kind of woodwind or brass instrument growing up, as well as piano lessons. And then once I stopped piano lessons, I had to take. I wanted to do rock and roll guitar, but my mom's like, no, it's got to be classical. You got to like get your foundation. Mm-hmm. So, what about that time? In high school when I was getting a lot of grief from my art teacher for being really creative. He was like the wrestling coach. That's why he was hired. And then he could draw like pencil drawings, so he was hired as the art teacher.
How did the wrestling coach become the art teacher?
Well, that was the priorities of school. It was like sports first, and then everything else kind of followed behind. So it was like, he's a wrestling coach, and then, he can draw, so let's make him the art teacher. And the wood shop teacher, same thing. But was like a football coach or something. And then, so around that time, I was getting some attention for being. I mean, all I wanted was attention, I think, as a kid, and especially from girls, which seemed impossible. So, and rock and roll seemed like my ticket. This is a story that's been told thousands of times. But I was like, I think if I play guitar, like I'll be noticed. And I know that was a big part of it. And I loved playing music. That was definitely the biggest part of it. It was just I loved the feeling of playing music. I loved the way my brain felt when I was playing music, and especially with other people in a band. It just so exciting. And so when I started playing bass in Captain Fathom, and we were playing a bunch of shows all over, it was just super exciting for me. It's a pretty antisocial kid to suddenly have a group of people that I was involved in that we cared about each other, and we cared about what we were making together, and it was just a really positive experience. So I suddenly just the association of music and being in a band was just meant the world to me.
Mm-hmm. When did you become antisocial? Because you said earlier that you had been, there was like that group of 9 boys that you kind of like ran with.
Well, that was different. I mean, then that wasn't school. That was just playing. And we it was a really sweet group of boys. There was a little bit of, ego as it got into the middle school and stuff, and we started dissipated. But as kids, we were really. But just school always terrified me. School and institutions, teachers, authority figures, all that stuff just terrified me. And so I was always. I mean, I went to a K through 8 school, that elementary school that literally had the same kids in it, like 24 kids in it the whole time. I mean, a few in and out, but basically the same kids. So we were just super tight, and so it was easy. That was easy. That didn't feel like school so much in grade school, but then I was still the quiet kid in that group, just drawing in the corner basically.
But you were like, they gave you the space to just be yourself.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it was really familiar to me after that, But then high school came. It was kind of like I was kind of down again to the being really out of. That was a blow kind of, by the end of high school, I felt really. Wasn't like I was really antisocial, but I had a group of. I was in the stoner group, even though I didn't smoke anything, or I was a straight edge kid through high school, but I just identified with those people.
Yeah, I understand.
Seemed accepting and open, and I felt safe, not judged.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, once you were like in this like small group of 24 people that were together for song, and then suddenly you're like, how big was your high school? Like a couple hundred, maybe?
It was 600 or something. I want to say 4 to 6, something like that. It wasn't Not big. Oh, was it that many? Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, I've been 600 or 800. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. You suddenly have like all these eyes on you all day, and it gets very like you get very self-conscious in this kind of like high school panopticon type deal where like you think, I mean, probably people aren't, but like you feel like everyone's looking at you because you're constantly in the hallways, like people staring at you or whatever. I would always try to just sit in the back of the classroom to kind of avoid that. And then I could goof around because then people would have to turn. If I made a joke or something, people would have to turn and they wouldn't want to do that. So I could just make a joke in the back of the classroom. People would laugh or not. And then and then things would go on, but no one would be staring at me. That would be the worst part, is the eyes.
Yeah. My memories of freshman year is just, I had long hair, like just hanging out, like I said, with like the skaters and just getting slammed into lockers from the football team. Remember that? So yeah, finally my junior year actually is like, screw this, I'm joining the football team. I like I've been like ranking on them. I hate them, but I don't know what it's like. I'm gonna go see what it's like, and I'm gonna join the football team. And it was a very odd experience.
How so?
Well, it was the year there was a lot of bullying happening that year on the team, and it was actually got out into the newspaper and stuff. It became like a thing because after the rehearsal, the coach would walk off and they would choose a person that wasn't working hard enough in the at the practice, and they would dogpile on them.
Oh.
And this one time we were on the bleachers, this kid got dogpiled on the bleachers, and someone was like stepping on his hand and stuff, and like broke his hand and stuff. It was bad. I was not involved in any of that on either end of it. So. But it was just, so that was the kind of, just seeing that up close and it was interesting. I just like to prove to myself that I could try stuff that was out of my comfort zone, and it was just, it felt good to just feel like I don't know, it was a barrier to cross that I felt like would help me to just face my fears. I was facing my fears, and then it was through high school I definitely opened up, and it just became like in a senior year obviously it was a different story. Wasn't that terrified little kid anymore. But
what made you terrified? Was it, I mean, you've said like Sandwich Island was kind of scary, and was it just that environment? Or do you think just being a sensitive kid, you were just like a little more attuned to fear than other people?
Well, like I say, it was a school that prioritized sports. It was the classic, like you could see on so many different TV shows and movies, that kind of dynamic of the jocks being being in control of the school in so many levels, and just loving that position. And so I just didn't feel like I fit. And when I was a freshman or sophomore, it was just really hard to fit in the school. But I mean, I had my little, I guess I fit into a little group, but it was just that classic scene of just, and I was bullied a lot from middle school through my freshman year, and as a kid too, but just for being a really nice, like I was a larger guy, but I was super nice, and I would never do anything back. So the bullies just loved to target me because they knew it, like I would be making an example, because I'm just we're messing with this big dude, and he's they would. Until one day I just totally snapped, and I was just like, just bring it on, just beat the crap out of me or something. I don't care anymore. This has been too much. I can't handle it anymore. Like I was just afraid to like walk around corners and stuff at school. Like it was just terrible.
Oh God.
And then so finally this kid just like, who's like, fine, let's go, and he just started punching me and got me on the ground. I was like beating my face, and and it just, nothing really felt as bad as the anticipation of it. And so I was just really relieved. Just after all that, and I kind of just got up and I was like, oh, I feel great. I'm like, I feel like that's all I was afraid of. Like, that was just a relief. I think I said something like, you broke my fingernail or something. That was the end of that. I was like finally just facing my fear and just walking into it. I was able to get through it.
Did they stop after that, or did it lessen?
They did. They stopped. It was pretty embarrassing for them because I didn't really give any reaction. I was just laying there, and of course, a crowd of people formed around, and they just didn't get the best of me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't upset. I was just like, huh, well, you proved yourself, I guess. And it really kind of, they're like, oh crap, well, this is embarrassing for us because we didn't get the result that we were going for, which was terror.
Simple-minded bullies. So how did your family get out to Sandwich Island in the first place? Like, your great-grandparents started the oyster business. Mm-hmm. Had they been there already, or did they move there from somewhere else?
They did. They were in Kirkland, and they sold cars and had a auto repair shop there. This is in the 1920s. And they'd been coming up to Sandwich Island to hunt this very rare canvasback duck that had a trajectory over Sandwich Flats. So everyone was trying to get this big canvasback duck, evidently, which is now, I think, gone because it was endangered back then, and I think they just killed them all. Which is, something on my mind. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if there's... I was going to look into that canvasback duck thing, see if there's any left, if there's any kind of conservation that I could be a part of. It's my family's... That's part of our story. But, and they ended up trading some cars for some tide flat rights and some land up there. Which was just... you could get land up there for nothing at that time. They were just wanting people to move up there to start paying taxes, right? So, they get a bunch of tide flats and some land along the beach to set up their the tents, which were for the first few years. And then my grandpa, he was a young man then, and he got it going with the help of his dad. Or his dad actually kind of started a thing, but he jumped right in there, and then it became all his kids, all Grandpa Bud's kids, Paul, John, Mark, and Bruce, the 4 boys. They all worked there, and my dad and Paul would work there their entire lives. And so, that's what we guess we kind of, but my dad's side moved in from Kirkland, and I don't really know the story how they got there, but I think they moved there from the East Coast or whatever before that. It's funny, like so many people, all the people on the West Coast have stories, right? How they came to the East Coast, but I think so often it was just such a traumatic experience coming over here that they're just like, we don't want to talk about that. Like, We're here now. Let's just start here. Start fresh. I think there's some pretty awful stories, probably amazing stories too, but a lot, like, I don't know many people who actually know the stories of how their families came out here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, you said it earlier too, that like the East Coast has a lot of trauma, and I never really thought of it much before, but I guess it does. I guess like everyone coming over here from Europe, it's always like on the East Coast, at least, from the 1600s to the early 1900s, or let's say the mid 1900s. It's trauma. It's like fleeing genocide or fleeing something or other, and then once they've kind of like settled there, then they spread to the rest of the United States.
People come to the East Coast were like fleeing Europe, getting there, and then there's all these people fleeing the East Coast coming here. It's like the flea of the flea.
Yeah, yeah, and they try to leave that behind,
Far
and
as
that might
far away
be
as
like,
possible.
yeah, what makes this side of the country a little more.
Conservative, almost. Like,
Oh, how so?
or what do you think? What are you gonna say?
I was gonna say like placid, where you're trying, like they're really trying to like. I've always heard people talk about how like, oh, coming to the West Coast, you know, you're trying to remake yourself. A lot of people are trying to do that, like leave the past behind, and they get a new, like going to high school or like when you go to college. Some people like try to like have a new personality or something like that, and it seems like the West Coast is college for United States settlers, and you could come out here. Well, you could, like, not anymore, but like there was a time where you could come out here, and you know, you got free land from the government or cheap land or whatever that they'd stolen. Obviously,
That's what my mom's side did that. They got the 20 acres and what was that? I can't remember what that was called. The whole, you know what I'm talking about, where they're giving away the land and just like start your farm and, you know, start paying taxes.
Yeah. I mean, are you people from Germany? Blau is a German word, so
I don't know. I mean, it could be. I know we have like Austrian heritage. I'm not sure. We don't really know where the Blau. But if you go to New York, there's like pages of Blaus. But otherwise, it's hard to find. Like There's not many Blaus that I know of on the West Coast. But yeah. When I remember going to New York for the first time, and looking at the phone book and being like, "Wow, there's so many Blaus." That's where they all are. I don't know if it's just they put the eye color in the wrong box for their last name or something, or if there was.
See if it's open. I don't
really know how it worked that the Blau name came to be. You know, it's not a name that's in Germany. But when I go to Germany, people like the name for. It's funny because Karl's a really old-fashioned name. Like no one's really named that anymore. There's like what is this name, Karl Blau? It's just so weird. But and Blau is like means the color blue, and it also means to be like wasted, like really stoned or really drunk, or to be Blau.
Huh.
So it's kind of a sweet rock and roll name, like kind of this old meets like I don't know.
Yeah, real punk rock, like very like early 80s hardcore.
Yeah.
So what's the oyster business like? I mean, what was actually happening with your grandparents and your parents and your uncles?
It's a cool. I mean, the Blaus have always done the oysters by hand. And I guess I should say right at the outset here that Blau Oysters no longer. It just closed its doors in the last like 4 years. So that's interesting. That just happened. But my dad and his brother Paul were definitely keeping it going. And now that my dad passed away and Paul, you know, he's pushing 80 now. If he's not already, he's not working there anymore, of course. So yeah, the next generation just couldn't quite get it together, couldn't figure out how to, and like I say, they just did it all by hand. And meanwhile, there's companies coming that have all this kind of machinery that they're using, and just like keeping up with those guys. I think Blau's kind of always had to charge a premium for their oysters because it was always handmade, just the way it's done. I mean, and I think. And now it's, the other companies that came in they're farming more land. I think they're just able to have a lot cheaper prices. So I think that's.
How do you get the oysters? Is it fish? I mean, I'm not really sure.
So let me describe this a little bit. We had a couple of 100 acres of tide flats out there, which when the tide goes out, the oysters are exposed. The land's exposed, right? So they're tide flats. So so then you could see the oysters on these and the oysters don't move. They're not like clams that have feet and can dig. They just sit there and just grow. And so you just find the best places for them to do that, which have enough food. Sandwich Bay is just a perfect place to grow oysters. Just this warm bay that it basically empties out every day and fills up every day a couple times. This perfect food comes in and out constantly. Food comes down from the Samish River, feeds the bay on one side, with just nutrients from the hills, I guess, mountains. And so what you do is, you plant these things out, and they take years to grow. I mean, you can get a really tiny oyster in a couple of years, and in 4 years you get like a nice, good sized, a bigger, like small or medium oyster. So it's really interesting. So you'd actually go out when the tide's out. Before the tide gets all the way out, you take your boat out there when you can still take the boat out, park it, the tide goes out, your boat's kind of like up on the sand for a while, and you have that window to harvest the oysters, and you throw them in bushel baskets, and then throw those into these big metal baskets that when the tide comes back up, you get the flatbed scow that doesn't have any kind of a rudder or anything on it. You can go in pretty shallow water, and then you've got a crane on this thing that can haul it up. So there's a little bit of machinery involved, but everything's pretty much done by hand. And then you go take the scow up to a dock and load that crane baskets full up onto the truck, drive the truck back to the plant and from the dock, and unload the truck there. Some of the singles would get picked out there on the conveyor belt going to the shucking room, and then so that there'd be a team out there kind of culling off beautiful oysters, singles for sales, and in the shell, and the rest would go up to the shucking room, which then there'd be a team of people just shucking by hand in a gallon tins, and then there'd be the graders that would separate the size of the oysters and put them in quart containers and such.
Interesting. So it's a somewhat big operation then.
It takes some bodies. Yeah, you got the. I mean, the same team that would harvest the oysters would shuck the oysters. And that was a Mexican team, by the way. There was a really faithful team of these workers that was just really amazing people, the hardest working people in it that I've ever known, and I worked alongside these guys for years, and I feel like got a lot out of them, just and their amazing, their attitude, and their just incredibly hard working ethic.
So, did you grow up like middle class? What did this allow you, and what is middle class on Samish Island, if that is true?
Yeah, I'd say we were middle class. I mean, we didn't blue collar. Like, my dad worked full time, but and he was the kind. It was, I mean, just that picture of my dad coming home from work, sitting in the easy chair with his pipe and his bowl of shelled nuts, with the nutcracker, and just that was, and reading the paper, pretty middle class. It's pretty. And my mom was just raising kids at home. She eventually worked in healthcare, but growing up, she was a homemaker, I guess they called it. So yeah, and we had a nice. We grew up on 2 acres. Our house wasn't fancy or anything. My dad built it himself. And
your dad built your house?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
My uncle built the first half, and my dad, after he bought it from my uncle and we were born, he built the add-ons to it. So yeah, he was handy. They had a really nice shop down at the plant, and he was a welder and a woodworker too. And yeah, so everything was really pretty handmade, done, but he had the means to buy the lumber and do, and yeah, I mean, it wasn't paying for our college necessarily, or they weren't that well off or anything, but they were, yeah, I think I'd say middle class for sure. Just those, but now, I mean, that land's worth a lot now, and we don't have it anymore. But I mean, that's yeah, I think everyone who stayed out there in San Michelle and had some land are basically millionaires now. I mean,
it's interesting. You know, was your dad still working as he was kind of like getting treatment?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there, what kind of disruption was that? Was it? I mean, emotionally, obviously, but in your lives, was it a big disruption?
Well, I mean, financially, the oyster plant really looked out for him, and when he, you know, and generally, health problems that anyone had any of the Blaus especially were going to kind of be taken care of while they were sick or healing. So they really took care of our family. Was never, but then again, like conversely, he was bailing out the oyster plant. Like he was the only one of them who kind of was saving money and trying to be frugal about it. And so in like the 90s, there was a big windstorm that covered all the oysters, and we had to basically start over the oyster plant. And he was able to bail them out. So it came around. But yeah, he was able to. I mean, there was stints. Those stints were a couple months, sometimes more, I think. But yeah.
Did they want you to get involved in the family business, or did they want you to kind of just go off on your own?
My family did not. Was my mom and I don't know my dad. He kind of kept his opinions about us to himself, but my mom was very much just like, you guys go find your thing. Like, the oyster plant it wasn't like a bad life or anything. It was just, I think she saw all her kids as having potential that they could just do whatever they wanted to do, or they would, and be, you know, they would figure out, all the kids would figure out their thing, and we pretty much did. Like, one of my brothers is a music teacher for the Lummi Nation, and another one's a social worker in Mount Vernon. And Alex, my youngest brother, he's probably the most talented of all of us, maybe, just with his skills as an artist, especially, but just he's an incredible artist. He's not doing art, but he's got a job. He's got a steady job. But yeah, so none of us. I mean, I do feel, in hindsight, I feel like that's something that maybe should have been on our radar. We could, I don't know, who knows? It's like, it just wasn't. We didn't have a big interest in the oyster business, and honestly, just didn't. Not like we didn't get along, but it was the Paul's family's kind of operation. Kind of in the end, they were all doing it. It's not like we didn't get along, but just maybe not exactly excited to work together. Those guys. Yeah. No, I love them. But.
Yeah. You said your parents were musical. Do you think they had wanted to do something a little more artistic?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I always wondered. My dad was a really wonderful artist as well, and he just gave it all to his family and the oyster plant, and I think he was happy to do that to some degree, just to be a provider and that. But I always felt like he had this untapped potential that we'll never know. You know what that would have happened, but. He could have gone either way. I feel like my dad could have gone either way. Like he brought a lot to the oyster plant, and he was probably the reason that kept going on as long as it did, in some ways. And I think he had a lot of pride in that, and he's known. I think he enjoyed his position in the company and his kind of social position of being this oyster guy, and he was just known and loved for it. And I think at the end of the day, he was really happy with his what he did. But I always wonder, like, because he was so talented and just a wonderful trumpet player. Yeah, but he had stage fright. He couldn't really perform he couldn't do it by himself. He could play in an orchestra. But I remember one time going to see him, and he doing like a Christmas concert, and where he had like this lead part, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't make his lips work, and with everyone looking at him.
Oh no,
too much pressure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Carl, that actually seems like a really nice place to end. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you. This is such a delight to talk
Andy,
to you.
thank you so much. It's been really nice to see you in person, and thanks for everything. It's interesting to go through my childhood and stuff with you, and I appreciate your questions. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh.